Okay, so we're live. Hey, Jeremy, how you doing,
Yeah,
sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. Look at you. You're in my podcast. It's um, it's an honor to have you here. I think we first met was in the Jakarta. It was in
1997. I remember it vividly.
yeah, in the
You were
music
one of the
store.
first people I met.
Oh, I
I
was.
don't think you know that. I really didn't know anything about Jakarta. I was in my rumah kos, my boarding house,
Right.
and I said, "Well, let's go to Block M because I heard there's music there." Um, and I went into a music store because that's where I thought there would be music.
Right.
And in the music store, you were there practicing playing a guitar with uh, with the guitarist from Pas, and you had little dreadlocks.
Right. Right. Bang bang. Yeah, bang
You
bang
were with
patch.
Bang Bang, yeah.
Right. Right.
And I said, I'd heard of this band called Krakatau, and you said, oh, they're playing down the street in jams. Do you remember that?
I remember that you asked me about one is it was Krakatau and then the other one was slang because your question was
Yeah.
is slang hardcore? I'm like, no, they're not.
Oh,
They're very not hard. I remember that. Yeah. So
yeah.
and then we continue. You went to Bandung and then we talk a lot about music
Mhm.
and yeah, the rest was history. How long were you spending in Indonesia in total?
Well, that was 1997. That was during my pilot study. That's when I first got there. But I went back in 1999 and I was there for a year.
Oh,
That's when
okay.
I really got to know who Poopin was and who you were. I had no idea who anyone was when I first showed up.
Right.
I just walked into a, a music store. It was very kebetulan. It was very much a coincidence.
Right, right, right time, right place. Because I
Yeah,
never been to that store. That was my first
really.
time. Yeah, it was that was my first time, and then I met you, and then yeah, it was it's a long history, and then we met again the last time
At
when
reverse
2000.
outfits,
Say again.
actually. In 1997, we met again in reverse outfits when I
Right,
first time
right
I went to Bandung.
in Bandung. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then the second time you come back in 1999. We also met in
Mhm.
Bandung, and then we met in
Yes.
several other, like in our shows. Because I remember
Yes.
you took pictures, and
Hmm.
then and then after that we met again in 2018. I was out. It was before, just about a month before I moved to the States,
Yes.
and
You were telling us about your plans.
yeah, yeah. So we talk in the. Was it in bookstore?
It was in a cafe. I don't think it was a bookstore.
Okay,
I don't
okay.
remember the name.
So it wasn't in Aksara Bookstore, Jakarta, yeah?
I don't think so.
Okay, okay, okay. I
I'll
remember
check
I
my
picked
notes.
you guys up from your hotel though, and then we
Yeah.
walked. Yeah, yeah. So I'd like to ask you a question about. I mean,
Okay.
this is so unique. We know you as a professor of heavy metal, and that's what we know in Indonesia. And I think you are well known. You are called that as well
Yeah.
in other places, like professor of heavy metal. How did you get into that?
Well, a lot of people ask me that, of course.
Yes.
And sebenarnya, it doesn't, seem like a very hard question for me because it's a hard one to answer, but it's not, a difficult question because for me, the rules, it's good music. So why not study it? From a very early age, I've wanted to tell people that it's a lot more interesting and a lot more important than most people think. I mean, when I was a, a kid, when I was a teenager, I thought, Iron Maiden's Rime of the Ancient Mariner had a lot of important cultural meaning to it. And, if only people would listen. And
Right.
that impulse, I think, helped inform my studies as an adult. So why heavy metal? I think for me the answer was always obvious. I think that once I realized I could study it and people were interested, and because my particular angle was heavy metal around the world because it had become such an important global phenomenon, it seemed like a great thing to study because I always thought it was important uh, as a cultural phenomenon, and I always thought it was great music, and it's something I enjoy. That's the honest answer. Well, it's a relatively new thing. It's not so new anymore. I think metal
Right.
studies has existed as an academic field uh, since 2008 officially. There was a conference in Austria, and I was there, and I was there talking about Indonesian and Malaysian and Singaporean heavy metal. Uh, and because I was there from the beginning, and because Metal Rules the Globe came out in 2011, uh, Southeast Asian heavy metal has been there from the beginning of the field, uh, owing in part to my efforts and Emma Bulch's and a few other folks. And now the field of Southeast Asian heavy metal studies is really dominated by Southeast Asian scholars themselves, people like Adil Johan and Azmil Yunor from Malaysia, and Yuka Narendra uh, from Indonesia, and Oki Sutopo, uh, and all kinds of Julianis Febierco, um, all kinds of people from Indonesia, Kimung, right? People have
Right,
been
Kimon.
documenting their own scenes, um, and I think that's great. And you know that means really that metal scholarship has been around for a while, for over 10 years, uh, but certainly it was not something that existed when I first did my field work. In fact, when I
Right.
was there in Indonesia, I never thought I could write about heavy metal and have people listen. I was hoping to write about heavy metal and the underground scene in Indonesia, but I didn't think anyone would really care about it. I thought my thesis would mostly be about dangdut because there
Mm,
was some interest in that. Mostly people, when they did ethnomusicological studies of Indonesia, at that time they wrote about gamelan. Uh,
right.
I wanted to write about dangdut and keroncong, but I learned about all this other stuff that was going on, jazz and pop and rock, and also this vast underground scene. And what happened was, since the underground scene played a role in the fall of Suharto, there was some interest in the underground
Mm,
scene. And then this rising generation of younger ethnomusicology scholars became very interested in the underground music. And because they became interested in the underground music, uh, it went along with a rise in punk and metal studies more generally. And my work became influential in those fields. And I had no idea that was going to happen
right.
when you first met me.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I thought that's what like pioneers do, right? You just start it and then do what you like,
Yes.
and people follow, and then what is,
Yeah.
oh, this matters to other people. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to pursue where the data goes and what's interesting to you. And not think about audience, not think about your career or where it's going to go. That's not as important. I mean, that's very important to uh, remember as a scholar. Is you're in it to learn stuff.
Right.
You can't be thinking about reception. You have to think about producing um, the things that you feel are most valuable and most interesting to you. It's it's just like music. You have to create for yourself first,
Yeah, yeah,
and that gives you the
I
best
agree with that.
results.
You have a background as a heavy metal listener yourself. Um,
Yeah.
you listen it from Western perspective, like where, when, or where this music was created. Um,
Hmm.
so what was surprising? What was something that really struck you um, about heavy metal in other part of the world?
Oh, a few things. One thing was that heavy metal in Indonesia uh, definitely was part of Indonesian culture. It had been, by the time I was there, and certainly by the 21st century, it had been fully indigenized, right?
Mm,
Uh, it had been really made part of everyday life there, and been made part of the local culture. And one of the ways that it had succeeded in that way is that some of the elements of heavy metal had really been brought out that were most similar to local culture. So heavy metal's emphasis on community and on sort of hanging out together and solidarity. Uh, the idea of contributing to your scene, right? That gets brought out in heavy metal culture in Indonesia. Even though those are important values in the West, they are much more likely to uh, be in conflict with the West's individualism, and you have
mm,
much more fragmentation in Western scenes, and much more discord, and much more gatekeeping, and much more just people not getting along. And so I was uh, I was struck by that contrast uh, that people were uh, much more kompak, as the term
right.
is in Indonesian, right? And that was one difference. Another was that, of course, obviously there was a much more of an effort to mix uh, heavy metal elements with elements of the local culture. Um,
Right.
and these self-conscious experimentations. And there have always been these experimentations. Early on, bands like Eternal Madness and Kremush, and bands like Gugat, uh, but those fusions continue, and those are very interesting. Voice of Baceprot, their newest song, "The Mighty Island," uh, is another example of particularly Sundanese music being used as a resource. Also, they have an instrumental um, that uses a pentatonic scale. So there's always interesting combinations of metal and local Indonesian music.
Is that also the case in other places?
Yes, yes, and it
Okay.
happens in other places too. It does. Um, Particularly, I've noticed, particularly since the rise of black metal and the release of Sepultura's roots. I think
Mm,
the rise of
mm,
black
okay.
metal, which emphasizes locality and place, but also originated outside of the English speaking world. It's most associated with Norway, certainly the second wave of black metal. But also in 1996, the release of Roots, which Yuka Narendra actually points out, was very influential in getting people to experiment with local sounds in a metal context. And that's inspired all kinds of Latin American metal fusions um, and indigenous metal fusions using American Indian languages, Polynesian metal fusions. It's a very influential record, and so. that there's been this kind of folk metal revolution. It's actually mostly taken place since 2010 that has been uh, very conspicuous in the global south. I think Indonesia kind of did it first because Indonesia is remarkable for the size of its metal scene. It's much larger than really anywhere else in the world in the global south outside of Latin America. Uh, but it's
Oh,
certainly the
interesting.
biggest in Asia outside of Latin America because Japan is part of the rich world. So
Right.
really, it's Latin America, Southeast Asia, um, primarily Indonesia, and then everywhere else is in a different category.
I
Mm-hmm.
spoke with my friend. He is Japanese, and
Uh huh.
then I also spoke with my friend who is Indonesian,
Uh huh.
and I asked them to be on this podcast, and then they were
Mm-hmm.
like, "Dude, I can't speak English well,"
Uh
and
huh.
I'm like, "I didn't realize that they don't speak English well, but we like connect in Facebook for I don't know 10 years probably. We never. I just realized that we never really talk to each other,
Uh huh.
but we like each other's posts because the what connect us is the music. So it's not the
Mm-hmm.
capability of us speaking English as the
Mm-hmm.
main language in music in general, but
Yeah.
the music itself. So how do
Mm.
you find that in metal? Do you find similarities in metal or
Dina
any other
Weinstein
music?
calls it. Dina Weinstein's called it a rough and ready form of English. It's just it's enough to bring the metal community together, but um, much of the metal community now doesn't speak English either side as a first language or even a second language, but they use it because it's the language that connects an international community.
Right.
Uh, and there are metal scenes uh, all over the world now, probably everywhere. When we um, published Metal Was a Globe, um, it was before the internet had its full impact. We even had, our chapters really went back to the 90s.
Hmm.
We had chapters about, metal and its development in the 90s and early 2000s in various countries. And a lot of it was what had happened before the internet when there was still a conventional recording industry that was looking to make money and people weren't just making music for the love of it and putting their music online for anyone to sample. Uh, and that restricted the kinds of people and the kinds of activities that were allowed to uh, to to go forward, particularly in censorious countries like, say, Saudi Arabia, or countries that didn't have at that time the technical and and electrical infrastructure, right? Um, so a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Now you don't have that as much. So we didn't have a lot of African metal in 2011. Um, there was an article about metal in Kenya that was appeared in the Metal Music Studies Journal that observed that since 2010 there's been a huge growth in heavy metal bands in Kenya. Really, since the publication of Metal's Globe. Um, at this point, I mean, there are bands in much of sub-Saharan Africa, probably all countries have metal bands. Uh, uh, the Caribbean, all these places that Keith Con-Harris once called metal-free zones. Um,
Hmm.
they have their own
Okay.
heavy metal bands. Um, there have now been Ed Banks has now written two books about heavy metal in Africa. Uh, of course, Northern Africa, Libya, Algeria, Egypt, they have had long-standing heavy metal scenes, and there has been a lot written about those. Uh, I've actually, I've edited a second book called Defiant Sounds. I co-edited that with my late wife, Esther Clinton, with Nelson Varas Diaz and Daniel Narvaez Raujo. Um, and that is particularly focused on the global south. And that has articles about Polynesian metal and articles about um, heavy metal in Brazil and heavy metal um, in Puerto Rico and heavy metal in Cuba. All these different places. Um, in addition to what's in Metals of Globe, uh, which is more of a mixed bag. It's also includes Slovenia and Malta um, and China and Japan. Um, but there's almost no place where there is no heavy metal. It's more common than McDonald's. It's
Mm.
something that seems to attract an audience wherever it goes, and it seems to, for want of a better expression, strike a chord, at least with some people, although usually a minority of people uh, in every society where it is available, or even where
Right
it's not available, people have access to it anyway. They somehow get access.
now, the if we say so, heavy metal in each part of the world was influenced by local culture. But how is the other way around? How heavy metal influence the culture? Is that something that happens as well, or
I think what heavy metal does is it creates a way to criticize local cultures, to criticize what's happening,
mm,
uh, because local cultures are modernizing everywhere you look. Things are changing in the societies of the world. Heavy metal usually comes in with a lot of other changes, right? Like McDonald's, right? There's more market penetration. There's more consumer goods. There's a rising middle class. Um, there is more technology. There are new forms of commerce. There's smartphones and computers. Uh, there's new there's new forms of entertainment, right? All these changes are even coming to villages now, right? And some of them are good and some of them are bad, and some of them are good but have bad consequences. Some of them are unforeseen consequences. And metal helps people make sense of these changes and helps them criticize and develop a position vis-a-vis those changes. I think this is one reason why people need heavy metal, at least some people, and I think that's why people embrace it. Is that it helps them come to terms with the changes of modernity. This is one of the main thesis statements of the Metal Rules of Globe book, and I think it holds up pretty well. And I think that's true in the global south. I think that's also true uh, in richer countries. It helps people come to terms with the changes in their lives because there's been a lot of changes in Western countries as well, particularly since the 1970s, which is when heavy metal first emerged. Right, the traditional working class in Western
mm,
countries has been destroyed as the manufacturing base has really withered away, and we no longer have a lot of factories in the United States, which used to supply a lot of employment for people. Um, So that is, that's one major change that's happened, along with smartphones and the internet. Um, so heavy metal is a response to social conditions,
Right.
but it's also a critical perspective on those changes.
So how do you see the penetration of the change? Is it cover everyone, like female population, for example, religious population? Are those also covered by those?
Well, yes, and what one of the things that's interesting about heavy metal is that because those changes do affect everyone, they also have they also mean that heavy metal can be used as a resource by people who aren't necessarily part of heavy metal's original audience, right? If heavy metal's original audience was working class young men, right, in places like the United States and England and Canada, that was no longer the case by the 1980s, and the surprising amount of women involved in heavy metal in societies where women are expected to fill very traditional roles uh, has been striking. Uh, but it isn't that surprising because heavy metal is provides an idea of freedom that really can be taken up by anyone who listens to it. Right? It's an idea of freedom in response to the modern world, and uh, it's not just open to the traditional audience for the music. It's really anyone who likes it can can be part of it, and that includes a lot of women in a lot of these societies where women are expected to know their place. This is music that allows people to say, "Well, I don't want to stay in my place," and no matter who they are, whether they're minorities in their society, whether they're ethnic minorities, whether they're um, uh, sexual minorities, whether they are women, whether they are children, right? Whether they are young people, they they become metalheads because they don't want to know their place, right? They don't want
Hmm.
to stay in their place, stay obedient, and heavy
Hmm.
metal lets them, you know, occupy that position.
How do you think heavy metal plays part in political change, especially in like in those countries? It's non-Western countries.
Well, I think heavy metal is more subversive in non-Western countries because,
Hmm.
as you said, in more conservative societies, its message of self-expression and liberation is more subversive than in the United States. Um, that said, uh, mostly in other countries, metalheads want the right to rock. They aren't necessarily the most political people, but if
Hmm.
you interfere with the right to rock, right, if you interfere with self-expression, if you interfere with the right to have a good time and the right to express yourself, then metalheads can be a very powerful force for political change. And that is, I think, what happened
Hmm.
in Indonesia is
Oh, interesting. Okay, okay.
uh, that that the metal scene joined the hardcore scene and the punk scene, and they became activists against Suharto, and that was the connection when they overthrew the New Order regime in 1998. And since then, things have gotten more complicated, and there's been a sort of a fragmentation and a parting of the ways. And part of that is that heavy metal is not inherently political the way punk music is, and I think
Right.
that there's been less of a central rallying cry uh, that that unites all metalheads. Right? People have different opinions about what next for the Indonesian polity, but there was very little ambiguity in the late New Order period. Um, Nobody seemed to want the dictatorship anymore after the Krismon, after the economic crisis. It was just a matter of organizing and protesting. And uh, surprisingly, um, the students won.
You didn't see that coming, like the students will win.
At the time, it didn't look like they were going to win. I think
Oh,
we
interesting. Okay.
forget how obvious, that it was not something that people thought was going to happen. The most recent memory people had of a mass democracy movement in Asia was Tiananmen Square
Hmm.
at that time.
Oh, okay.
And people thought that that was what was going to happen at the DPR building, that there would be a massacre and that the state would reassume control. I think a lot of people were very surprised that Suharto stepped down. Since then, we've
Oh,
had the Arab Spring, and Mubarak stepped down, and Ben Ali stepped down, and we've had regime changes in a lot of places. And it seemed like Indonesia was just one of many. Although Indonesia is now the only country I think that's successfully democratized in the last half century or so from all the revolutions. Even Tunisia abolished its parliament. But I think in 1998, there was no guarantee when um, young people protested against the regime that they would be successful. I think,
okay.
in retrospect, it might have seemed obvious that they would, but I don't think at the time it did. And
Okay.
it wasn't obvious that the country was going to survive. I think people thought Indonesia was going to fall apart. When I got there in 1999, that was the day that Gustor was elected, and
Right.
the people in the hotel said Indonesia Perang, Gustor
Right.
President Indonesia Perang, which um, it means Indonesia is at war. And people thought that the country was going to collapse.
Oh,
Now we know
interesting.
better, but at the time it was very tenuous.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Yeah, interesting. I just find that point of view because I was in the middle of that. Although I didn't
Mhm. Yeah.
I wasn't as intensely uh, uh, how you call it uh, uh, involved in the student
Mhm.
movement as Aryan did, my vocalist
Yeah.
did, and but I was there. I didn't see that. I didn't. I don't know. I think we just so naive and we didn't think of if we're going to win or not. We just know
Mhm.
that we need to do that, and then I wasn't like you said. I was more of a skeptic. I was like, I don't want to be involved in politics back then.
Mhm.
Um, but then Arian was writing a political lyrics, and
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I let it go, and then go ahead. If it works,
Mhm.
then let's do it. If this is something that we need to do, then let's do it.
Right.
Because I think my in my mind was what if I what if they like ban all the music events. What if we cannot
Hmm.
sing again? Why if what if we cannot, have a gig again? So I guess that's what triggers me to be like, how you call it, more aware, and let myself or let our band,
Hmm.
kind of involve in the political movement. And then,
Hmm.
but back then I really don't think that, we will lose or we will win. We just, I don't know. I think we stupid enough to believe that it probably will work. You know what I'm saying? So,
Hmm.
um, I guess that's,
That,
um,
that's what I said. I mean, metalheads want the right to rock, and what you're
yeah,
worried about is what if they censor the music? That's where metalheads draw the line. They'll
yeah,
put up
yeah,
with a lot, but they will not put up with turning off the music. That's where they draw the line, and
right.
that's we've seen that. We've seen that happen in the Middle East. We've seen that happen in China. That's where they draw the line. That's when metalheads become politically active. Is when they try to shut off the music, because metalheads have to have their music, and that is a struggle worth having. And that's one of the weird things about metal as an agent of social change, is that political scientists don't understand how that works, right?
Mm,
That music can be a political cause. But one thing is certain, that heavy metal music is an indicator of social change. It's correlated with social change. However you define it, if there is going to be a political change in the country, there has to be heavy metal first. I mean, we even saw that with the fall of the Soviet Union. There was heavy metal in the country first. A lot of it got co opted by the Soviet government, but it was there first. A lot of bands played behind the Iron Curtain. They played in Eastern Europe. And the presence of heavy metal kind of precipitated the fall of the Iron Curtain. So there is a correlation, but of course, correlation doesn't equal causality. But there is a connection, because we also have seen that in other places where there's a connection between these musics like metal, punk, and even underground hip hop and democratic social change. And it's something that even some political scientists have started to write about.
you have any favorite bands and how that impact your involvement or your interest in studying heavy metal? I know you mentioned that because you're a metalhead yourself, so it's a no brainer to do the
Yeah,
study that you like. But how did that come together?
uh, I listen to a lot of different bands. Some of it is just because I like them, and some of it is directly connected to my work. Uh,
Mm,
Certainly, I listen to a lot of most of the metal bands I listen to are not from the United States, and that is
okay.
mostly because I like the older styles, and those styles are more popular outside the United States than in the United States. Um, Even though, for the most part, they were invented in the United States, styles like death metal and thrash metal. Uh, Black metal is more a European style, and although I like American style black metal. Um, and
Oh,
Panopticon is one of my favorite bands, especially their Kentucky album, which came out in 2012. Uh, but I also like Alceste from France. Um, But I try to listen to a range of things, and I also listen to a lot of non-metal bands. Um, Sometimes a majority of things I listen to are not metal at all. Um, and I listen to a lot of Indonesian bands. Uh, a lot of them pretty predictable. I listen to a lot of Dead Squad. I was just
Mm,
listening to them. I forget which album it was. Um, and Hellcrust. Um, I really like Seringai, uh, Ariane's new band.
mm,
Not so new anymore. Um, I've been writing about Voice of Baceprot because they are popular here, um, and I listened to them. Uh, I saw them when they did their U.S. tour last summer.
right.
Uh, yeah, I mean, there are new ones every week. I try not to repeat myself too much, although I started listening to Power Slave just because, and Number of the Beast just because I had them and it had been a while. So
Is this
I do return
Power
to the
Slave
classics.
Iron Maiden or Power
Yeah,
Slave
Iron
the
Maiden.
band in
Yeah,
Surabaya? Oh, okay.
no, not the band in Surabaya.
Right.
Not
You know that. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
That's Power Metal, not Power Slave.
Oh, okay. I thought the
Yeah,
band was okay. Yeah. Okay. Can I talk about a voice of Baceprot?
yeah, sure.
I mean, in Indonesia, I saw those kind of bands, like a lot of them, and
Uh huh.
you see on backstage of heavy metal concerts, most of the
Uh huh.
girlfriends of the metal musicians, girls with hijab. So
Yeah.
it's common. It's common view for me, because but then I don't know, and then people are like people outside or the Western world probably say like, wow, this is something that's very powerful. This is encouraging. How do you see them?
Yeah.
How what do you think makes them special?
Well, there are a few things. I mean, I have often said to people that in Indonesia, it's not unusual at all for women wearing hijabs to be metalheads because
Mm,
most women in Indonesia now seem to be wearing the headscarf.
right,
It's considered, respectful attire for lots of people, especially if they're from rural areas, conservative areas. It's not all that unusual, even in metal bands like Gugat, for example. Achi and Gugat wears the headscarf. Uh, so it's not unusual, but most of the people are fans or girlfriends, right?
right,
Uh, and so the fact that their musicians captured the Western press's imagination. On the other hand, they really are very good musicians. I saw them play. I actually went to see them with Tina Weinstein, who is probably the foremost heavy metal scholar in the world. She wrote Heavy Metal Cultural Sociology back in 1991, and she was impressed with them. She's seen Iron Maiden scores of times. Knows knew Ronnie James Dio, knew Ozzy, and knew Lemmy. Um, um, she knows all those guys and is an expert on the heavy metal, and she thought they were quite impressive. And they really do play well together. Uh, the music they play is not terribly fashionable, I think, in the heavy metal scene because it draws upon 90s influences that are not uh, particularly valued by the heavy metal elite. They're not black metal, they're not death metal. But on the other hand, I am told that new metal is fashionable again. It's sort of becoming more legitimate. Uh, but they do play well together, and they have a very impressive attitude. And I've been impressed by their willingness to turn their back temporarily on international stardom in order to shore up their national audience, to play more gigs in Indonesia.
Okay.
Uh, I think that I certainly recognize the frustration of folks who've been working hard in the Indonesian metal scene, for years and years, who haven't had the same opportunities they've had, but they haven't had the same compelling story. The international press needs a compelling story. I went to
Right.
see Burger Kill, when they toured the United States, and they played much smaller places, but they had a
Right.
great show. Um, but it was a very small tour, and they've been together for 25 years. And
Right.
this is before Megaben's passed. So he got
Yeah,
to see
it
the
was
United
in
States
2019, 2020, or 2020.
2019. Yeah,
19, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Uh, and they were having a great time. Um, but it was ironic. I mean, they had to be a band for 25 years before they came to the United States. But that was
Right.
never their their focus. Their focus was always on domestic success, and it takes uh, a different sound and a different set of skills and a different aesthetic to get the attention of international audiences. And Voice of Baceprot kind of had to get international attention because they couldn't get gigs in Indonesia because they were too controversial. So it's not like that avenue was really available to them.
Right.
So it's a
Right. Yeah.
complicated case, I think. What's your
Yeah.
thought
I
about
think I don't think they represent me as an Indonesian. You know,
it?
because we have something else. I think to offer, the international market. To me, because I will, from my perspective, from like we speak earlier about, I want to create something for myself first, and then I
Mm-hmm.
thought that's a good proposition. We have good proposition, like Burger Kill have good proposition. They're solid. They play in Wacken Festival. They play in Bloodstock Festival. And it's a very solid performance. And everyone
Mm-hmm.
who were there, like the British, in the European Western European, who attend uh, Wacken Festival, was like stoked to see them. Like, oh,
Yeah.
Indonesian, and then they play like very solid, and then the music
Mm-hmm.
is like highly
Yeah.
skillful, and then those kind of stuff. So I think I think we have the chance to, like, Indonesia have that proposition as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, so that's why um, I don't want them to represent probably the whole uh, what happened in Indonesia. I think
Mm-hmm.
well, probably that's the majority of Indonesian, but I'm not the majority probably, so I don't feel like being represented directly by voice of Baceprot.
Hmm.
But I'd rather being represented by Burger Kill or Senyawa.
What does your daughter think of Voice of Bacheprot? I mean, they are female role models.
Are they famous in TikTok? Okay, so that's interesting. One day my daughter asked me, how did you get into metal? Where do you get your information about the bands, like rock bands and metal bands? I was like, oh, it used to be like from my friends, from thank
Mm-hmm.
you list on the cover, from
Yeah.
magazines. And then
Mm-hmm.
I asked her, how about you? And she was like, well, I got everything from TikTok.
in
And
TikTok.
so,
Yep.
yeah, so uh, if they are famous in TikTok, so my daughter probably know them, but I don't know. I never asked her actually. Oh, that's my daughter. Hey, Brooklyn,
I don't know if they are.
do you ever do you know about this band Voice of Baceprot from Indonesia? There's a three girls playing heavy metal wearing hijab. No, you don't know them? Oh, she doesn't know them.
Know them.
No, she doesn't know them.
Guess they're not on TikTok.
Probably are they not even in TikTok or? Oh, she never see them in TikTok. Oh, interesting.
Hmm.
Okay,
They should go on TikTok.
fascinating. I didn't realize that much until I speak with you. Um,
Yeah.
what's the connection
Hmm.
with how music or heavy metal can liberate someone or trigger someone to think, oh, there's liberation, and then you want that, and then you aim for that, and then you go for it, and then you become liberated.
Hmm. That's an
Yeah.
idea that I had from talking to Yuki from Pas. He said, what the music does is it allows you to realize there isn't just one way of doing things, and you can have disagreements, and that it leads
Mhm.
to a more um, democratic culture. You can have disagreements among your friends, and you realize that not everyone has to be the same way. Not everyone has to conform.
Right.
And that's from the singer of Paz before he went
You
religious.
want right.
This is 19 probably 1999. He said this, and I thought that was an important insight
Right.
that this music was a new ideology, a new way of thinking for a lot of people. I think that's true in the United States also. A lot of my students in Ohio come from very conservative rural backgrounds,
Right.
and the popular culture, particularly the music that they're exposed to, gives them a way out. So it's
Right.
not that different in some parts of the United States. California is very different than, say, the places people you meet are from, from rural Indiana or rural Arkansas. Those are very different places than where you live.
Right.
And I live in rural Ohio, and it's a very different place.
Right. Okay, so about the book, about the publication that you do, about how does that impact the whole study of music of heavy metal?
You
I
mean
think
Metal Rules the Globe?
yes, particularly metal rules the globe.
Yeah, well, the publication of Metal Rules the Globe was really important because it drew attention to the importance of heavy metal outside of the places people normally thought of. People thought of heavy metal as being popular in Europe and the United States and Canada and Australia, basically Europe and the Anglophone world, and maybe Japan. But a lot of people were not aware how important it was in other places, like Southeast Asia and Latin America, especially, where there had been really important scenes since the 1980s and even before. Uh, and our collection highlighted those scenes.
Hmm.
Uh, and one thing that was apparent when we published this is that other styles of popular music just didn't have that reach. Hip hop had that reach, but not other kinds of rock music. Um, and it helped give heavy metal legitimacy, I think, in the academy as uh, an object of study that was um, worth considering, uh, was worth inquiring about, and it meant that the study of heavy metal was not going to be ethnocentric, the way classical music,
Mm.
conventional musicology tended to be, and the way the study of popular culture more broadly tends to be very focused on America. But the study of heavy metal has always been the study of global heavy metal. As I said, our very first conference in 2008, there were papers about Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore. There were also papers about Turkey and papers about Brazil. Um, it's always been a very global field from the very beginning. Uh, Metal studies is a global discipline, and Metal as a Globe played a part in that. There are other scholars who are studying heavy metal in other parts of the world who weren't even part of that collection. There was a Swiss guy, or a Swedish guy. I think he was Swiss, but there was a guy studying heavy metal in Botswana. Uh,
Mm.
uh, there was a German scholar who was studying heavy metal in Madagascar. Very small scenes there, but they were still present even in the early 2000s. Um, Another scholar studying heavy metal in Nigeria. Uh, in addition to the folks in the Metals of Globe collection, uh, uh, Pierre Hecker studying heavy metal Turkey. Uh, so there are a number of different very important early studies of heavy metal in far-flung places, um, as far as out as Easter Island, right? Um, there's one chapter about Easter Island in Metal's Globe.
Mm.
There's metal everywhere, and uh, the metal community uh, is a global one and encompasses the entire world, and it doesn't um, exclude anyone based on uh, disability or ability. It doesn't exclude. I just contributed with Esther a chapter on to a collection on heavy metal and disability. It doesn't exclude based on disability. It doesn't exclude based on ethnicity or race. It doesn't exclude based on gender. It doesn't exclude based on sexual orientation. There was a book on LGBTQ folks and heavy metal, and there there have been a number of books on heavy metal and gender. There have been books on heavy metal and ethnicity, and they all have the same finding that the heavy metal community does not exclude. Uh, it's an inclusive, um, uh, worldwide fandom that's dedicated to music above all.
Mm. We don't see much of heavy metal or metal music is on the top of the charts, except probably Judas Priest a few months
Mm-hmm.
ago with the new album.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And well, we don't see them in top charts anymore. They play small gigs. There are festivals, of course, but
Yeah.
it's not the main theme or the main category that the media would like to cover. Um, how do you think this will? Because right wing politics tend to there's a lot of restriction which ends by banning some books or some concerts. Will heavy metal see have another resurgence because of this? Will it affecting them at all? Speaking of from history, because I
Mhm.
just spoke with my friend the other day. He was my first podcast guest, and he's like, history repeats itself, but not internally, but it repeats itself in a new context. What do you think?
Will heavy metal reassert itself? Who knows? I mean, it's not a question anyone can answer.
Hmm.
It would be nice, but heavy metal has become very marginalized because rock and roll has become marginalized. I think within rock music itself, heavy metal has actually gotten more prominent because rock and roll has become very marginal, particularly in the United States. And heavy metal has emerged as the strongest form of rock and roll.
Hmm.
Uh, my youngest nephews and my nieces um, are learning to play this music. There's these schools of rock now, and they're learning to play Iron Maiden and Danzig and punk music. They're learning to play the Ramones, and
Oh, that's cool.
it's kind of all a bit strange, but
Right.
rock has become sort of dad rock. Right? It's become canonical. Um, and old Metallica, they're learning to play. Um, so it's become kind of museumified. And the question,
Hmm.
will heavy metal return, with all this right wing extremism coming back? It's a good question. Um, and who knows? Uh, it's going to come back eventually, I think. I think that it's too popular around the world to disappear from sight. It still remains a very popular genre of music, just maybe not in the United States. Uh, it's still actually quite popular in Europe,
Right.
uh, but politically, it's always been somewhat conflicted. It's had, it really encompasses a variety of political orientations. Because of the importance of community, um, metal has always been willing to absorb contradictions. It's Metal is kind of like Nasacom, you know, it tries to absorb all the different orientations under one big umbrella of metal. So metal is like Sukarno, right? And Sukarno tried to absorb the nationalists and the Islamists and the communists, right? And say, well, we're all in this together. I can absorb all of it. That's like heavy metal community, if that makes sense.
Right. So Joko is heavy metal president then, because that's what he did in
Yeah,
the past. Okay. Okay.
except Jacoby is smart enough to know that um, yeah, that he wants to absorb the nationalists and and the uh, the progressives, right? But he knows he can't absorb the Islamists, so he's basically just allying himself with the militarists so that two against one.
Right.
But yeah, he's kind of like Sukarno, except he knows that he can't absorb all three. He has to only absorb two.
Is that also how do you see Biden doing that? I mean, this is out of,
Hmm.
but he tried to get. Um, I mean,
Well,
his
Biden,
his theme is all like he's trying to, because I'm in San Francisco where all the
mhm,
progressive
right?
are located, and I cannot
Mhm.
align with them not agree entirely, but I kind of
Hmm.
align of many of their beliefs and how um, you know the public should be governed. He tried to or want to Republicans to or political opponents to agree with him as well, or look understand
Hmm.
that I'm your president too.
Yeah, he's similar to Jacoby in that sense. He has the problem of not being Obama. Obama was able to unite the center left and the left. And part of that was that he was young, charismatic, and black. And Biden is old, uncharismatic, and white. And so he hasn't been able to unite the center left and the left. He's basically just the center left and the center. And
Right,
so he has enemies on both sides. And that's maybe not enough for him. He has to convince enough people in the center because he doesn't have the left. Uh, I don't think he's that different politically from Obama, but he just doesn't have the same image.
right,
Um, Jokowi was more popular, but he also has enemies. And also, I think I think at this point, Jokowi, when he completely lost the left because he's in the pocket of Suharto's cronies.
right,
But I think Jokowi recognized that he needed to do that to counteract the power of the Islamists. I don't know if he had an alternative. I think Biden also was faced with these um, very bad bargains that he has to make that
right.
make nobody happy.
A new thing as well for me because like everyone seems to have opinions here. Everyone is crazy
Hmm.
here.
Yeah.
Like and then they not only have opinions, they also express it. Like, no, I
Hmm.
disagree. And
Hmm.
so it's kind of it's a well not new. I know that that is what I can expect in America, but in the United States. But when I'm
Hmm.
there, it's kind of different because in Indonesia we kind of hold. Let's talk in the back because I don't want him to hear bad things from me, or I don't want to like getting
Hmm.
like a fight directly with someone. So let's just talk behind their back. It's a solution. It's a solution for the Indonesian to express themselves, but in a safe way. I don't know. In
Hmm.
America, you don't play it safe. You just and that's what I have with
Hmm.
my daughter. She's like she can just say whatever she wants. Sometimes it's just where do you get that? But
Hmm.
it's what's
Oh,
something that you work on right now?
well, right now I'm writing an essay on music and popular culture, looking at the history of how popular culture has um, redefined music and musical experience and made it an item for sale, made
Hmm.
it part of an industry, uh, uh, made it part of a profit making enterprise that we all kind of take for granted now. But it's a sort of global statement that um, needed to be made, sort of as a guide to further research. So I'm working on that now. I also am going to be presenting at a couple conferences, doing a paper on voice of Baceprot, and then doing a paper on the changing status of new metal and changing composition of metalheads in the world from uh, its origins in working class folks um, uh, to its contemporary reality where it has a more middle class global audience. And that's more a preliminary study since there's not a lot of data. But certainly there's been a lot of cultural shifts in the music that are easy to point to.
Mm.
Uh, and then my larger project is to um, create a sort of meta study of different approaches to popular music, taking an ethnographic perspective. That is, um, doing what I did in Indonesia. Other people have done that in other countries, other milieu, uh, and it's been many years um, of people doing that, and I want to collect them all and decide what we've learned, and if there's some sort of unified approach that we can take from all of that.
I mean, I'm obviously uh, accept you as an academic, and then asking question about our music. How do you see like metalheads, other metalheads, accept scholars coming to them and ask questions, and are they like acceptable? Are they open for that, or are there any
Uh,
challenge there?
there are some metalheads who don't want scholars in their scene. Uh, I don't blame them. I have argued with zine publishers and musicians and fans about the need, for uh, academic scholarship on the music they love.
Mm,
And
okay.
some people I've convinced, and some people I haven't. I think, like any other important cultural phenomenon, I think there should be a body of scholarship addressing it. Uh,
Right.
that's my that's my position as a professor in a popular culture department. That things should be studied, whether or not they have traditionally been in the academy or not. And there's certainly a lot to be studied in heavy metal. It's a very important cultural phenomenon of the late 20th and early 21st century. Uh, but not everyone accepts the legitimacy of the field, both in the culture and without. But
Mm,
that's not my problem. I think that the research and the findings speak for themselves. I think it's important work, and
right.
it continues without me at this point. I got things started in the beginning, but my contributions are not so important anymore. I'm happy to talk about them, but it's out of my control, and I'm happy about that. It's already
Right.
got a life of its own.
Would you have anything you think is important they want to?
Uh, did I? Let's see. Well, no, I don't. I don't think there's anything I really want to say in conclusion. I guess it's getting dark in here now.
Right.
Yeah. Um,
Is it central time in your place? Yeah.
no, no, it's Eastern time.
Oh, Eastern
So
time. Oh, okay.
the days are long here, which is nice. Uh,
Right.
yeah, I appreciate this opportunity. I hope that this is useful information for your audience. Uh, this is, I think, rather theoretical for people in the music business. I don't know if I have any specific recommendations for people who are working in the business, except to say that, of course, national success in music is different than international success. There are different criteria and there are different expectations depending on the audience. And when I did research in Indonesia 20 years ago, lots of people wanted to go international. But what I learned is that the record companies didn't want them to go international. The record companies wanted them to go national. right? The record
Mm,
companies wanted them to sell to Indonesian consumers. That was their orientation, whether they were Sony, right, whether they were a branch of an international corporation, or whether they were, an independent label, which meant, uh, a very large commercial label like Aquarius, right? Aquarius was not interested in the American market. They
yeah,
didn't think that was realistic. They wanted to sell to Sulawesi. They wanted to sell to Surabaya, and they wanted to sell um, to Sumatra. Right? They're not interested in a non-Indonesian speaking market, and so you have to be realistic about where your product is going to go and who it's going to
right.
reach.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah, that's it.
that's a really good perspective or advice, because there's a, I don't know, there's a struggle of where Indonesian want to bring Indonesian music in the future,
Mhm.
because at one part they want to be like going international, and but going international for what, for doing what, and what do they want to
Mhm.
achieve with by going international? Are they want to learn and then bring home and then build, or just go international uncontrollably, or they want to be tourists? And
Yeah.
that's I think it's like probably every other country that want to, that is not in the, like the main stage of a music, global music industry, probably have the same problem. And because I see that in some other countries as well, which is just it's
Hmm.
quite fascinating that Indonesia has a, like, so it's a big country. One of my friend
Yeah.
who is Taiwanese, is a small island, and it's
Yeah.
like it's a small island, and when I see Indonesia, I was like, dude, you know that how big potential your country potential is? It's a big market. You could be using his word. Indonesia will be the America of Asian music industry if you know,
Hmm.
if you can see that.
Yeah.
But
That
then,
makes sense.
yeah, it's still struggle internally where they want to go. Oh, I'm pretty glad that I'm starting this project and I start talking with music, my music mate again. Because in the past
Hmm.
6 years I've been here, I work in very low, kind of low positions in the company, or
Hmm.
in my employment. So I don't really use my brain that much. And in the past 3 weeks,
Hmm.
I've been like, oh, okay, my brain is functioning again like it used to be. And so I'm
Hmm.
glad. And yeah, so thank you so much for being here and being part of the very early steps of this project. And I really appreciate it, Jeremy.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's good to be here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so
All right.
we'll stay in touch. Yeah, we'll
Yes,
yes. All right. Okay, Jeremy.
indeed.
Thank you so much.
All right.
You have a good one.
All right. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.